So a huge mazel tov to the Rosh Kollel, Talmidi, Ahuvi, Yedid Nafshi, Talmud HaMachkim, Rabbi Reb Chaim, mazel tov. And we just had the tremendous simcha of a bris milah in Tanis Esther. The Gemara darshans a posik in Megillah Esther, Le'Yehuda Moiso Oiro, Simcha, Soson, V'Yakor. Oiro is a Torah, Simcha is a Yom Tov, Soson is a milah, V'Yakor is a Tefillin. And Rashi explains, what do these four mitzvahs have to do with Megillah Esther? That the Goyim, Haman and Achashverosh, were geyser against the kiyum of these mitzvahs. So, in all the Shas HaGzeira that we commemorate, that we remember, it is always a combination of physical annihilation and murder and shmad, and also the ruchnius, the kenisyonis. So the difference between Chanukah and Purim is, Chanukah was primarily, first and foremost, L'ashkicham torosecho v'lavira mechukar etzenecho. But in Midrash Chazal we see that the Greeks, like the Romans, like the Babylonians, were achzorim, and they killed, and they mobbed, and they rampaged, and they tortured. But the Ikik Zera was L'ashkicham torosecho v'lavira mechukar etzenecho. And Haman, it was the other way around. The Ikik Zera was Lahashmet, La'arag, La'yabed, but they also were geyser against Torah, Yom Tov, Milah, and Tefillin. And when Bnei Yisrael was zeichet to the nace of Mordechai ve'Esther, it was also a salvation of Chizuk HaTorah, of Torah, and one of the mitzvahs is Bris Milah. So Baruch Hashem, a special schus and Tanis Esther to have Bris Milah. And Brocha, I talk in the name of the entire Kollel, Brocha to Reb Chaim. You should be able to continue Lahagdil Torah Uladira, and Baruch Mort Chazeh Kotten Godel Yeh. I assume the name is after Rosh Hashiva, Hagona Baruch Mort Chazrachi. So Baruch Mort Chazeh Kotten should be like the greater Baruch Mordcha, should be a Marbitz Torah be Yisrael and a Godel be Yisrael, and you should have so much naches. So today we will be discussing a fascinating shaila, and I understand many dealt with this shaila, but this shaila came to me in three different directions, three different scenarios. Thousands of soldiers are up in the north, and it is a very strict regulation command that by night they could put on no light. The enemy should not be able to know where the soldiers are stationed. So there's a total blackout by nightfall. So they can't read Megillah by night. Would there be a heter to read the Megillah meplaga mincha? Tov reish tzadik beis sif koten daled. Shechanoch says that b'shas atchak one could read the Megillah meplaga mincha. And the halacha that Shechanoch is dealing with is people that are fasting, and in normal circumstances, in normal years, Tanis says that is Erev Purim, and a chayla or a zoken that can't wait so long with a fast, because he will need to wait till they read the Megillah in shul, and he's locked up at home, and then they come home from shul and read the Megillah again. So yesh mokum la'okol to read the Megillah meplaga mincha. Would that be heter this year when Erev Purim is Shabbos Kodesh? Would there be a heter to read on Shabbos afternoon Liacha plaga mincha to all those soldiers that would not be able to read the Megillah by night? I wrote a separate tshuva about soldiers that will have an opportunity to hear the Megillah or by night or by day, whether there is preference, day or night, but that is a topic we will not be discussing today. I want to speak about the question of plaga mincha. The other question, which is similar in nature, I was asked by a person that runs an old age home, and most of the elderly people who are very shvach can't be up by night, and they'll fall asleep. They can't be out after Tzeisik Echovim, and they definitely will not be able to listen to the Megillah late by night. Could we read the Megillah? Meplag HaMincha, once again, Shabbos afternoon. And just yesterday I got a question from America, a woman that is suffering some psychiatric, psychotic, neurological disorder, and she's terrified by the dark, and she goes to sleep every night before nightfall when it's still light outside, and she cannot be up after nightfall. Once again, would there be a heter to read the Megillah and Plaga Mincha? So in previous years, yes, to read the Megillah for Plaga Mincha. Would there be a heter this year? So a few years ago, in the era of COVID, and I said many times, these two periods are very different in their nature, but many of the shilas are the same. Unusual times bring unusual shilas that sometimes require unusual answers and responses. So I was asked by a Choshev in Manchester a few years ago at the period of COVID, first day Rosh Hashanah, a person had COVID, and he was terrified. He wasn't feeling well, and he was afraid they're going to take him to the hospital. And as you all remember in those days, in the hospital you were totally isolated, especially in Chutz La'aretz. So being in the hospital, second day Rosh Hashanah, he won't be able to hear shofar. The first day of Rosh Hashanah was Shabbos. And he pleaded they should blow him shofar on Shabbos because he's afraid he's going to be taken to the hospital and he's not going to hear the shofar tomorrow. And who knows whether he'll make it, whether he'll survive. Maybe he'll never hear shofar again. So he very much wanted to hear shofar on Shabbos. So I said to this Rav, Yesu v'daita overrides even a malacha d'oraisa. Ki shofar chochma vein a malacha, it's only nis d'rabanan. But it should be explained to this person, he's a frum Jew, that if the chachomim said no, then it's better not. That there's no merit in blowing shofar against the Rotzen Chachamim. And you know, in Sefer Chasidus and the Or Sameach and many others say, they say in the name of the Baditcha Mitzadik, Chishav Nasas Mitzvah V'nenes V'lo Yisroa Ma'anon L'Kosav Kili Yisroa. We blow shofar, we don't know all the kavonas. But if a Kodesh Baruch Hu blows for us, he knows all the kavonas better than anyone else. So we're better off when we don't blow shofar on Shabbos than if we would. So putting all this aside, is there any room in halacha to be mekel? So in the tshuva I wrote, and it's printed in Shalosh Tshuvas Minchas Osher Koronis and Peiches. I wrote at great length about the Machlokes B'Kiveg and the Chelkas Yoyav. When a person blows shofar on Shabbos, is he mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa? B'Kiveg in Drush v'Chidush. Nobody knows the sefer anymore, Drush v'Chidush. I don't even know whether it's reprinted, because today it is, you know, probably Mesuder in the Tshuvas, in the Chidushim. Drush v'Chidush is a sefer that has no structure at all. Once upon a time, Gedolim wrote Sforim without any system, without any structure. They assumed, what do you need a structure? What do you need a maftech? You're going to get the sefer, you're going to learn it from A to Z, from page 1 till the end of the sefer. And no maftech, no structure, but marocha ches, drush v'chidush. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, even though Chachomim said no, but you're still makayim mitzvah d'oraisa. Chelkas Yoyav, Tzadik Tes, disagrees, and he says, according to Toisen Sukkah Dav Gimel, Imos Yisuken Lo Kiyamta Mitzvah Sekum Yemecho, if a person is makayim mitzvah d'oraisa shelo lefi tiknu Chazal, afilu d'oraisa ein biyodeh, afilu d'oraisa lo kiyam. There's a sefer Eishel Avrom. So how many Eishel Avroms does everybody know? Everybody knows the Prima Godem Eishel Avrom. Many people know who is Eishel Avrom number 2? The Buchacher. Eishel Avrom number 3, also a very important sefer, 200 years ago and more. Rabbi Avrom Oppenheimer, Shulchan Aruch Chaim, Siman Tov Reish, and he is Mesupik. A person that blew shofar first day Rosh Hashanah Shechali is B'Shabbos, would he say Shechiyoni the second day Rosh Hashanah when he blows shofar? Would he say Shechiyoni? And L'choira, it's a Mitla Talia and the Machlokes B'Kiva Eiger and the Chelkas Yoyav. But I say no. I don't think this Machlokes really has any practical implications. What is a mitzvah de pshita? If you blow shofar Shabbos and you say birchas, a mitzvah is a brocha levatola, because birchas is a mitzvah de Rabbanan, and Rabbanan said no. So you can't say birchas a mitzvah de Rabbanan on a mitzvah that is against the Tzoyin Chachomim. And for the same reason, I say, of course you say Shechiyono tomorrow, because your Shechiyono yesterday was a brocha levatola. Because all brachas are the Rabbanon, and if Chachomim say no, then you can't say a bracha. And if yesterday's Shechiyon was a bracha levatola, then you say one tomorrow. But anyway, the Iker Shaila is based on Divrei Haran in Masechet Rosh Hashanah Daf Hey. The Ran asks, and many Rishonim ask this question, and there are various different terutzim, but the Ran asks, why don't we find the Gzeir Shem Yavaren Dal Adam Shusarab by Mila b'Shabbos? Mila Shechali is b'Shabbos. Shem Yikach Sakan Shel Mila v'Yavarenu Dalad Ames b'Shusarabim. So there were guys on Shofar, Lulav, and Megillah. Why not Mila? And the Ran says, the Gzeir is only by mitzvah shahakal trudem bo. Everybody is busy with a mitzvah. It's counterintuitive, this svara. But if it's a yochid, then his neighbors, his children, everybody will remind him. You know, it's Shabbos. You can't take a sakan shel mila b'shus harabim. So, if we're dealing with a yochid, maybe there is no gzeira shem yaverenoi. Nobody blows shofar on Shabbos. But if this person is terrified and he's afraid he's going to miss the mitzvah of shofar, maybe there is a mokem lahakal. Shalat shetuvas mimamakim, chelik dalet simen hey. Whenever I mention the sefer, I must give some background. Rabbi Ephraim Ashli was a Godel B'Torah, and he was a great Talmid Chacham in Ghetto Kovno. And Shailis used to come to him, and he used to scribble his tshuva and Maramakoimis based on his memory on little pieces of scrap paper, and buried those little pieces of paper under the posts of the barbed wire fence surrounding the ghetto, hoping that if b'siyata d'shmai he will survive, he will try to retrieve those little notes and develop them into a Sefer Shalos Teshuvos. B'chazdei Hashem, he prevailed, he survived, and he retrieved many of these notes, and he printed 5 Chalukim Shalos Teshuvos Mimamakim. Kishem HaSefer Kein Hu, Mimamakim Kirasichu Hashem. And in Chelik Dalet Siman Hey, he tells an amazing story, Tovshin Gimel. First day Sukkot fell on Shabbos. And somebody arrived from outside the ghetto, and he had Dalad Minim. And people were so moved and so excited, and they broke out crying. But he said he needs to leave in the afternoon. He's not going to be here tomorrow morning. And so many people came to ask Rav Oshri, should we be Mekayim Mitzvahs Lulav? We didn't dream we'll have a Lulav. And who knows, maybe it's the last opportunity in our lifetime to be Mekayim Mitzvahs Lulav. It was Shabbos. And Rav Oshri says he was at loss. He didn't know what to paskin. So, Ochaz bepelach hashtika. He didn't say anything. And he said, people were standing in line, and they made a brocha, and they were noit lulav, be'sukkah shechaliyas b'shabes. After Yom Tov, he went to ask the Dvar Avram. Kovner Rav was in the ghetto. But he was ill, he was bedridden, so they couldn't ask him in real time. But b'diavad, he went to ask the Dvar Avram. And he told the Dvar Avram that hundreds of people shook the lulav, and they said a brocha. And the Dvar Avram said they were right. In such circumstances, Chazal weren't guys of Shem Yavarenu Dal Adam Shusarab. So this Rav in Manchester said maybe the same would apply in our case. So to me it's a pshitis, you know, if they would come to ask me b'diavad, I would also say the same. Because those Tzebrachane Yidden took that lulav with such pure intentions. Why break their heart even further? B'diavad, it's not going to happen again, so you don't need to. Sometimes we're afraid to give a psak b'diavad because next year they're going to do it lechatchila. It's not going to happen again. We hope it'll never, ever happen again. So why not be mechazik Yidden? I even say more than this. Maybe the nachas ruach that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had in the heavens, from that netilas lulav be'isur, alavai, once in a lifetime, we should be makayim the mitzvah lulav and make such a nachas ruach for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because many times I say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not bound by any rules. Gzeir Shemi Yavarenu is for us. It doesn't bind HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think the Nachas Ruach, when that lulav came up in Shemayim to the Kisei HaKavod, Tzebrachane Yidden, clinging to their Amunah, being Mekayim, instead of throwing the lulav out of the window, Mesiras Nefesh, to be Mekayim a mitzvah lulav with the Tzebrachane hearts, You know, I become emotional just thinking about it, and I'm choking up. So I think, not only would I encourage them b'di'evet, but I would not give a psak lechatchila that this is what you should do, and I'm confident that neither would the Dvar Avram say that is a heter. But b'di'evet, of course, I would encourage them. So that's the story of the Dvar Avram, and I don't think we could learn any halacha ledaris from the Dvar Avram. And I also think that the circumstances are not the same. So regarding that story, legabet Tkiya Shofar, I said once again, if it's Yesu V'daita is matter achile b'yom kippurim. It's matter is a skill. It's matter kores. Definitely is matter and this is the rabbanon like zerish yaverenoi. But it's not the right thing. It's not the right thing because Chazal aser, then it's also. And there's no point in being mekayim a mitzvah neged divrei Chazal. So one question we mentioned was shofar, and the other one is lulav, the story of the ma'amakim, Tovshin Gimel in Ghetto Kovna. The story with shofar, Tovshin Aintes. When was it? Pei Aleph. Tovshin Pei Aleph in Manchester. But now we come to Mikra Megillah. So would there be room arguing, according to the Ran, that the Gzeira is only when all the people are busy with the mitzvah, but if it's Yechidim, then there is no Gzeira of Shemi Yaverenoi. So would it be reasonable to argue in the three cases that we mentioned when it's only Yechidim? Well, soldiers up north are not exactly Yechidim, but still, it's not Klal Yisrael. It's a very limited number of people. People in a Moshe Zakenim, which is a far smaller number of people, or that woman somewhere in America who was Mamish Yochid. Maybe B'chai Gavna there would be no of Shemi Yaverenoi. The most important source is the Mogen Avraham and Tofreish Tzadik Beis. Siv Daled, when the Mechaber says, B'shas Adchak, you could be Yoitze Megillah Meplaga Mincha. Mogen Avraham Siv Kondvov says, L'chayre Huadin B'Shabbos. But b'Shabbos there's an Isser of Shemi Yaverenoi, the Tekon of Rabbe. So the Mogen Avraham clearly says, even though we're dealing with a special case, a Shas Adchak, sick people, elderly people, there is no room to be Mekel, Lacha Plaga Mincha, because it's Shabbos Kodesh, and Shabbos there is no Mikra Megillah. Pri Megadim explains the Mogen Avraham v'maskim ledvarav. Livu Sheisrad explains the Mogen Avraham, maskim ledvarav. Rabbi Baruch Frankel writes in his Agos Shulchan Aruch HaChaim, tzorech yun, lefi divrei Aran. But he doesn't disagree with the Mogen Avraham. He writes, tzorech loimar, as was a pshitas to me when I wrote that tshuva regarding Tkiyas Shofar. All the Ran means to say, lama loy gazro b'mila, aval kishe gazro loy plug. And there's no room to say that by shofar, Megillah, or lulav, kishegazo chachomim, that you should not blow shofar, you should not take levar. And there's no mikra Megillah. There's no room to say there's a difference between a yochad and a tzibur. And how big is that tzibur? Is it everyone, not everyone? Loi plug. And loi plug is one of the most fundamental rules that we find by Tikkunei Chazal. So, is there any room for leniency? Chasam Sofer. Chuvas Chasam Sofer Kuf Tzadikei quotes what he wrote in Tofreish Peiches. There's a Chuvas Shevet Alevi Chelik Hei. And he deals with a similar question, and he brings a Baruch Frankel, and he doesn't bring the Chasam Sofer, which is a big chiddush to me, because I knew Rav Wosner very well. And besides his amazing Bekiyas B'Kol Chalkei Torah, he was a special Bukiyas Chasam Sofer. He had a special feeling for the Chasam Sofer, and it was a Buki Nivra B'Divrei Chasam Sofer. And it's interesting he doesn't quote the Chasam Sofer because the Chasam Sofer is not on the spot. The Mogen Avraham is Tofreish Tzadik Beis, and the Chasam Sofer is Tofreish Peiches. But the Chasam Sofer once again is in the Tshuvas or Chaim Kuf Tzadikei, and the Chasam Sofer writes Tzorech Yen Ala Mogen Avraham. Maybe for Yechidim there would be no Isser. But once again, he doesn't paskin against the Mogen Avraham. It's not a psak. He writes it b'derech ha'ora v'tzorech iyun. He does not write the svara pshuto of loy plug, like Rabbi Frankel writes. But when a Godel writes tzorech iyun on a Mogen Avraham, it doesn't mean that we have a psak that disagrees with the Mogen Avraham. Before the bris or right after the bris, the Rav and the Rosh HaKollel, we have one Rosh HaKollel and we have a double, the Rav and the Rosh HaKollel, Rabbi Kiva, showed me the Netziv. And I looked into the Netziv, Hamek Shala, She'ilta Samech Zayin. The Netziv also doesn't paskin against the Mogen Avraham. But he writes, Svora Mechudeshes Ad Lema'od, that the Ika Gzeira of Shema Yavirenoi is Nafka Mishum Megillah Diyoim. Because everybody is busy with the Megillah B'Yoim. But B'Laylo, Shelo Shechich or Letzeis, maybe they weren't Geyser, Shema Yavirenoi. He doesn't quote the Ran in Rosh Hashanah, so I don't know what he means. Does he mean similar to the Ran? So why weren't they Geyser B'Laylo? Because many people stay at home. So maybe he means to say, if all the people are Makayim a mitzvah, some of them might have this mistake. But if less people are Makayim the mitzvah, we don't need to be choishish that somebody will have a mistake. If we find one fool out of 1,000, maybe we don't need to be choishish one fool out of 100. So maybe that's the svor of the Netziv. So there were choishish, Shemi Yaverenoi, if everybody is busy, but if less people are busy, they're not choishish. Kuli hai Shemi Yavirenoi. Or maybe, does he mean because there are less? I don't know. But that is a svara klusha to be doicha the Mogen Avraham that is agreed upon by all the achronim, and to be mater exeres chachamim you need a svara alimta. So I don't know exactly what he means because lo shchicha letzeis balayla. We assume that thousands of people left their homes to be Makayim Megillah Delayla, maybe somewhat less than in the morning. Tosis writes, Ika Persum and is in the morning. So obviously in the morning more people came to hear the Megillah than by night. But probably by night also, most of the people came out to be Mekayim, Mitzvah Chashuva, Persum and Issa. So probably there were many people. So I don't know exactly what the Sfor of the Netziv is, but he as well is not choylek on the Mogen Avraham. And when you write pilpul lakan velakan, that is not a source for psak. And besides the fact that we have a Mogen Avraham, when you're mekel keneged gzeres chachomim, you need a raya, and it's not enough to have an argument. You need a raya. Chachomim asru. Likro Megillah b'Shabbos Shema Yaveren. If you want to be mekel, you need a compelling argument and you need rayas, not just a svara ba'alma. And this brings us to the last dilemma, which is also very interesting. Cheshek Shloima. Hagos Megillah Dafei. The Cheshek Shloima is Shloima HaKohen Mevilna. He was the Av Beis Din in Vilna, brother of Rabbi Tzal HaKohen. They were the Gedolim in Vilna more than 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And the Cheshek Shloima has a gewaldige chiddush, and he writes, a cotton that becomes bar mitzvah, Purim HaMeshulish on Shabbos, needs to read the Megillah on Shabbos. And why is that? Everybody read yesterday, and so did he. But yesterday, he was a cotton, he wasn't a bar chiyuva. Shabbos, he's a bar chiyuva. And Purim is Shabbos. Yudalit is Shabbos. And therefore, Tezvov is Shabbos. We're talking about Purim and Meshulish. And therefore, he needs to read the Megillah on Shabbos. What about Shema Yeverenoi? Because it's Yechidim, there is no Gzeir Shema Yeverenoi based on the Ran. But the Cheshek Shloim has all the others I've mentioned says, Ach yesh Shloimar deloi pluk chachamim. And when there were geyser, the Gzeir is across the board. And this is such a svara pshuta, like Rabbi Frankel writes, Lagabe choyle v'zoken, meplaga mincha. He writes the same Lagabe bar mitzvah. I think he primarily wrote this because it's a gewaldige chap. It's a nice chiddush. Yesterday was a cotton. But Megillah is only the Rabbanon. Yesterday was a Trei Rabbanon. Today is a Chad Rabbanon. Just like a Trei Rabbanon isn't Moitze Chad Rabbanon, he's not Yoitzu with his Megillah yesterday because he was a Trei Rabbanon, and Shabbos is a Chad Rabbanon. But I don't think he's serious about it. And he himself writes, Yesh loimar de loi plug. So, in the Tshuvas of Rabbi Kiva Yosef Schlesinger, who was a Hungarian Rav that came to Yerushalayim, he writes, Shomati Machasni, Pinchas, Zelek Pinchas, I don't remember what his name, that he heard that the B'shilei Diskan Paskin, that Ktanim, that become Bar Mitzvah, Shabbos, Purim the Meshonash, need to read on Shabbos. And Rav Schlesinger disagrees, and he writes the same svara, as I mentioned before. But he quotes Rav B'shilei Diskan. Could we rely on this psak? Would our situation be similar to a cotton? I think by a cotton the chiddush is far greater than in our situation. Because he heard the Megillah yesterday. Meichetesa again. Trei de Rabbanon, Chad de Rabbanon, against Tikkun Chazal. Eid mepi ed is not kosher la'edis. So we heard from his son-in-law that the B'shilei Paskin, that means nothing. Tzitz HaKodesh writes that Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonnevel Paskin the same psak. So we have two Gedolei Yerushalayim. Rabbi B'shilei Diskin, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonnevel. And Rabbi Zonnevel didn't bring that on. And he brings source number 3, Beitz Daf Yud Ches. So if a kli is nitme b'yom tev, muter latbila b'yom tev. Because tme b'yom tev lo shchicha. Dovid lo shchiach, they weren't choishes shem yetaltel b'shus harabim. So he says maybe we could compare the gzeira of Shofar Megillah and Lulav to the Issa of Tfilas Kelem and Yom Tev b'Kelem Shin Mi'erev Yom Tev. Soifo shel davar. I was not makel in all these 3 circumstances to read Megillah B'Layla. If a person is an oines, he's an oines, and he's poter. Oines echmona patre. So soldiers definitely can't break the rules and endanger themselves and others, and they must uphold the protocol. So they're going to be yotzei tomorrow morning. So one of the shiurim I gave in this period is if one needs to choose between Megillah D'Layla and Megillah D'Yom, which one is preferable? And I gave an entire shiur and I wrote a tshuva about this because this is once again a shaila that we dealt with in the COVID period when hundreds of people were locked up at homes, thousands even, the ill, and does anybody still remember what is bidud? The mavudadim, that's history. And many people were afraid to go into their homes. They might be infected. So there were some tzaddikim that volunteered to go mebayis labayis, but they couldn't promise to come by night and by day. So many people had to choose which Megillah do you want. And the same now with tens of thousands of soldiers in active duty. So I wrote about this. And Reb Chaim, in the very same day, Shehichnas Benoyle Brisa Shel Avraham Avinu was toreach to send me an Aruch HaShulchan, which I wasn't aware of, and Yasher Koyach. So, if you're an oines by night, Mekol Sibishihi, and I was malal Shulchan Aruch on 3 different scenarios. Oines Echmona Patrai, and all these people will be Yotzei Megillah by day, and there's nothing more they could do. So the Sfasemis wants to be Mechadish. If you were an Oines and you couldn't read the Megillah by night, you need to read it twice by day, Litashlumin. And no, there is no Tashlumin by Mikra Megillah. It's a Gevaldige Chiddush, the Sfasemis writes, and he quotes that the Birkas Yosef brings it from someone, and he rejects it. I just saw Birkei Yosef here. Could I maybe have the Birkei Yosef? I would like to see it. But I was not Matio Mikra Megillah b'Shabbos because we never heard of Mikra Megillah b'Shabbos. So, a comment which is something I shared with you many, many times.
It's still light out for the solar, maybe it's enough time. The old people could stay up till Shiur.
Yeah, it depends how we define Ben Shmoshes, and that is the sugya we're dealing with. So, when I agreed to say the Shiur today, Rabbinish told me we're learning Amir Anachri. Younger lad would like to hear something about Amir Anachri, so he said maybe I should deal with a question whether we can ask a guy to read the Megillah for after Plaga Mincha to be moisi others, and that would be Purim Torah. So that's a very nice shaila for Purim. So fundamentally, I think if we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos, we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos. And if you can't read the Megillah in a proper time, then you can't read the Megillah. And Chishav Lasas Mitzvah V'Enes V'Lo Yasor Mala Ol Lakosov Ki Ilu Asor. So So I assume, maybe I don't remember correctly, that Kriyas HaMegillah is Tov Reish Pei Tes. Rabbi, could I ask you, maybe you find the Birkei Yosef? So, Halacha L'Maisa, I don't think there is room to be Mekel, Mikra, Megillah, V'Yom. So what I wanted to say is this. Corona is once in a lifetime. A woman that can be up after nightfall is extremely not shachiach. War is war, and a blackout by war is not something we would expect the Rashba or the Ran or the Beis Yosef to deal with. But a bar mitzvah and Purim HaMeshulish happens all the time. And the mere fact that Miyamois Chazal Ad Yomeinu, nobody came up with a chiddush that a bar mitzvah boy who becomes bar mitzvah Shabbos needs to read the Megillah on Shabbos is enough to prove that this is not a halacha. And this is a fundamental approach to psak that I shared so many times. If a halacha is a mitzvah d'shchicha, and we would expect all the major poskim, Miyamei Chazal, and Yomeinu, to deal with the question of a mitzvah boy that becomes a mitzvah on Shabbos, and everybody read the Megillah on Friday. Would he read the Megillah on Shabbos? If nobody says yes, then the conclusion is no. So I was not Michael in Mikra Megillah in all the three circumstances that I mentioned.
Necessarily, could be bar mitzvah, not a raya for other cases, because bar mitzvah is yotzi.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so I do not see in the Birkei Yosef what the Svasemis. Oh yes, I do in the second part. So the Birkei Yosef was asked by one of the Gedolim of his period, whether there is tashlumin if somebody skipped Megillah by night. And yes, and he clearly says there is no tashlumin. Einoi doim el tefillah. So this is an interesting question, and we're oisik ben yonah deyoyim. So what I want to share with you is something I spoke about many times. We all know how important minhagei Yisrael are, and how we're makpid on minhagim. And I wrote at great length in my sforum, some were printed and some were not printed yet, about the importance of minhagim. Twice in Shas, Chazal say, menolai, that minig has substance, that minhagim are important. Al tito ishtoyer semecho in chulen and in psochim. But there's one minig from minhagei Purim that Baruch Hashem nobody keeps today. And I say Baruch Hashem, it's very good that nobody holds this minig. And this is a minig that's not brought in the Poskim, only once in Shas and Eder Mem Daled, Mashvarte de Puraya. And Rashi writes, what's the story of Mashvarte de Puraya? The kids used to dig pits and light fire in those pits, and then the children used to jump over the fire. And what shaykhs does that have with Purim? We wonder. I mean, what's a shaykhs? Why would that be Mashvarte de Puraya? What's the source? What's the idea? Vele biyoymari. Hodor kibluhu biyamei achashverosh ma'ahavas haneis. Medur Rabbi Yoraisa. The Gemara says the Eden might argue, Kofale hakigiyas. We were in earnest. We weren't up to it. But Toyses asks, Shabbos Pei Zayin, but in the same blood Gemara, Chazal say, B'shosh shegdim Yisroel Nasar and Ishmael Yordu, Samech Ribe Malach HaShos V'Lbishem Shnei Ksorim. So, what about Kabbalah Satira? Was it coercion? Were they imposed, or were they out of free will? Chazal say Kofalei Markigiyas. On the other hand, B'shosh shegdim Yisroel Nasar and Ishmael. So Toyses says, Kofel HaMekigi is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol was afraid. Can't say the words HaKadosh Baruch Hu was afraid, but Kachos what he says, that when the Yidden will see the Eisha Gedolah, they might regret, and they might turn back. And that is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu says this is a point of no retreat. There is no way back. There's no way back. Kofel HaMekigi is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Choshesh. When they're going to see the fire, they'll retract. And I always say, so let's check what happened when they did see the fire. How did they respond? So on Parshas Vaschan, the Pasuk says, Ve'hinei ha'ar boyer be'esh, choshech onon v'arofal. And then what's the Pasuk say? Ve'tikrovun ve'tamdun tachas ahar. Nobody looked for cover. Nobody tried to run away. They actually saw the fire. And it was a terrifying sight, because usually when you have a big fire, there's a lot of light. On one hand, Har Boya Be'esh. The other hand, Choshech Onon V'Arofal. Uli Tifartem Shel Yisrael. Nobody wanted out. They all pushed in. V'tikrovun, v'talmed, v'tachzar. V'hem tuku l'roglecho. Rashi writes, L'shivchom Shel Yisrael. Tuku l'roglecho toich. They wanted to be under that mountain. And in my shul, by the meaning of Kol HaNa'orim, I always say, what's the source of the meaning Kol HaNa'orim? We spread out a talis, and everybody pulls that talis. He wants to be sure that he and his children are under the talis. That's a zeichel akuf aleim harkigiyas. V'tikruvun v'tamdun tachzar. And I could see and I imagine everybody pulling the mountain just to be sure that he's under the mountain, and the mountain almost fell apart. It almost disintegrated. Like the talesim, everybody pulls the talis and the talesim fall and become detached. That's a zecha, kofan hamakigiyas. So how did the Jews respond when they saw that fire? Nobody ran away. V'tikravun v'tamdun tachasar. And that is the minig. Kids put on fires, jump over the fire. We weren't afraid of fire then, and we're not afraid of the fire now. This is what we want. And Kabbalah Satira was Maratzoin, Ma'ahava. And that's a Zecher, Le Hinei Hahar Boyer Be'esh. Kodesh Baruch was afraid they might run away, they might regret. No. We weren't afraid, we weren't intimidated by the fire then, we're not intimidated by the fire now. Yes, It's not easy to keep Tariag mitzvahs, but this is what we want, and we'll do our best. And they rededicated and really devoted themselves to Kabbalas HaTorah, B'yamei Mordechai ve'Esther. And it was a new Kabbalas HaTorah. So, these days, Yemei Purim should be a renewal of Hodor Kibluhu B'yamei Achashverosh, Metoich Avas Haneis, Metoich Simchas Haneis. And as we know from Sifrei Kodesh, that Ramchal writes it Kama v'Kama Pa'omim in Derech Hashem and in others form, and the Kedushas Levi, our Yom Tovim are not days of nostalgia, not days in which we remember events that are long gone. Nothing is gone. By us, the past is never past. And Yemei Chag are days of Chidush HaMa'oris, and all the Shefa Eloki that they had, this all comes back every year. So Hodor Kiblu B'mei Achashverosh also needs to come back every year. All the P'chinas come back every year. So in these days, when we rejoice in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Nisim, Hodor Kiblu B'mei Achashverosh, and we need to redevote ourselves La'avas Torah, La'asmoda B'Torah, La'simchas HaTorah, V'ashreinu Ma Tov Chalkeinu. So in today's Shiur, I mentioned, I started the Shiur with the dilemma that many soldiers have. So we are still in the middle of this terrible war. So there's an organization that printed a little Minchas Osher that fits into the soldiers' gear. And thousands of soldiers, since then I've been learning, and it's a big schus for me, learning Minchas Osher. So they printed a Sefer on Bereshis, and they asked me permission to print Shemois. I say, I give no permission, because I hope that by the time Shemois will come, the war will be over. To our dismay, Shemois came, Shemois left, and the war is not yet over. So before Hanukkah, I once again said, I don't want you to print such a Sefer on Hanukkah because I hope the war will be over. Hanukkah came, Hanukkah left. We're Erev Purim, so they printed a Sefer on Purim. I hope they will never print one on Bamidbar at least, and definitely not on Devarim. We all hope and we all daven that this war should finally be over, and no more Yiddish Kinderlech will be dying and badly injured, and no more broken families. So, B'yamei Purim, this Vesema says that everything comes back, and the Zgula of a Nafoichu also comes back every year. And Mapolas Amolek, every year is Mesugel, writes this Vesemis. So let us hope that we will finally see in these days of Purim, Nisim and Eflois, V'nafoichu asher yishletu haYehudim ha'emo b'soneim, and we should be able to come back to normal shilas, not the strange ones. Normal shilas that we deal with, normal circumstances via Mei Shalom, and we should be zoichet and Nisim and Eflois, v'Kodesh Baruch Hu Yerachem al Amo Yisrael, v'lo yeshoma oit shoit v'shever, and only b'soris tov, so many families will have difficulty with Simchas Purim. Families, thousands of families that have lost loved ones and young children and young soldiers, and nebuch those families who don't even know what's happening with their kroivim, with their loved ones who are still hostages. Kodesh Baruch Hu Yerachem, and Kol Beis Yisrael should be able to be Makayim Simchas Purim. Hu Rachamon, Hu Yaseh Lanu, Nisim v'Neflois, Keshem Shosiso Laviseinu b'Yom HaMahem u'Bizman Hazeh. We should be zeichel to be as Goyal Tzedek b'mheira v'yameinu amen. So I want to invite you all to my house on Purim. Leil Purim, my Talmidim come together throughout the day, open door, anybody that comes. I do not mean to say that I expect you to make an effort. I know transportation is so difficult, so I don't request that anybody comes, but if anybody does come, I will be extremely happy to see you. We should be able always to be sameach together, b'simchas HaTorah, b'simchas HaMitzvah, and listige Purim, lonu v'lakol Beis Yisrael.